It's been a pleasure having your company, all my viewers out there, on Alan Jones on Sky News for the past 17 months, including the thousands of viewer emails and texting me to have your say. Thank you to all the Sky News people behind the scenes who've helped.
Look, you can call these protesters the fringe no more. They are mainstream Aussies and they've had enough of these major parties not respecting their basic rights and freedoms. Well, g'day and welcome to episode 74 of The Other Side with Damian Coory for the week of Wednesday, November the 10th. Another big show for you this week. We've got tens of thousands of people hitting the streets in Melbourne for a protest that even a leader as arrogant as Dan Andrews can't ignore. Alan Jones leaves Sky News. The Other Side is leaving Discernable. Shock. More on that in a moment. Mr. Bean reminds us of why free speech is so very important. The Liberal Democrats explain why they think abolishing the states is not a good idea. And we have a podcast-length interview on COP26 with our energy expert, Ben Beattie. And it is completely Greta Thunberg free. Tens of thousands of people hit the streets outside State Parliament in Melbourne last weekend to protest both mandatory vaccination through coercion and discrimination, as well as the horrible pandemic laws that Dan Andrews is trying to ram through the Victorian Parliament right now. For more on the detail of those laws, you can check out last week's episode 73, where we took a very deep dive on that.
Kill the Bill has echoed through the city as tens of thousands marched on Parliament. They were out in force protesting against pandemic laws and mandatory vaccines.
Well, at least Channel 9 got the intro right for once, but their state political reporter couldn't help but start editorialising and painting the protesters in the worst possible light right from the start.
Preaching human rights as those among them behaved like animals.
Well, no excuses for that behaviour. That is the behaviour of a pig and doesn't help anybody's cause. But it's also not the way this story should have started. Attacks on you, Mr. Reporter, are not the main news. But he did eventually get to the point.
Frustrated, locked-out Victorians marched in their thousands, occupying Spring Street for hours, outraged by pandemic laws, marginalised by a vaccine mandate.
Because I'm not double vaccinated, he's not allowed entry into disability services, he's not allowed to have speech therapy, he's not allowed to have anything. So he suffers because I am hesitant.
I think that's shameful. I mean, discrimination and segregation are wrong. I mean, they're fundamentally wrong for whatever reason.
This bill consolidates all of the power into the Premier and the Health Minister and cuts out effective oversight by the Parliament.
Good. Some sensible sound bites from sensible, smart people there with legitimate concerns about both the mandatory vaccination program and these ridiculous laws that Dan Andrews' Labor Party is trying to ram through in Victoria. Make no mistake, there were tens of thousands of people at that protest, most of them anti-coercion and forced mandated vaccination, all of them opposed to the outrageous pandemic laws proposed by Andrews, which would see power vested in him alone to order the arrest and jailing and fining of people and businesses. It is one of the scariest power grabs in our nation's history, and thousands of Aussies are waking up to it and are not happy about it. There is going to be an almighty backlash against the Labor Party at this next federal election, and an almighty backlash against the Liberal Party because it's done nothing to rein in this madness. Look, you can call these protesters the fringe no more. They are mainstream Aussies and they've had enough of these major parties not respecting their basic rights and freedoms. And there is already a backlash against mainstream media with people turning off in droves. Which brings me to the departure from Sky News of Alan Jones. Jones' 8 p.m. time slot was taken off him, and he was offered time slots on the weekend instead. All to, as Andrew Bolt explained, make way for Piers Morgan.
When Alan got his 8 p.m. show, he did well. He lifted the ratings. We're all very grateful for that. His videos on our website do exceptionally well. He should be proud of what he's done. Thing is, we've also signed up Piers Morgan. That's an international deal. We're part of that. And we have to find room for Piers Morgan and also pay for him. And Alan was not sacked. He was offered other shows, different time slots. He refused them, as is his right, and he resigned. He was not sacked. A lot of talk went into trying to get him to stay, and we are very sorry to lose him. I certainly am.
That's Andrew Bolt speaking before Alan Jones' show on his final night on Sky News. Piers Morgan will be hosting a new show which will air in 3 countries. A new talk TV station in the UK owned by News Corp, Fox Nation in the US, and Sky News Australia. Piers Morgan isn't well known in Australia, and those that do know him see him as the guy who gave Ben Shapiro a hard time. He's not as popular as Alan Jones with Sky's base audience. So see how he goes, I guess.
It's been a pleasure having your company, all my viewers out there, on Alan Jones on Sky News for the past 17 months, including the thousands of viewer emails and texting me to have your say. Thank you to all the Sky News people behind the scenes who've helped. And remember, you can still find me on my Facebook page. I ain't going away. You search Alan Jones Australia. So stay with me and I'll still be with you. Just search Alan Jones Australia. So good night and good health.
And that's Alan Jones signing off for the last time there on Sky. He is a force of nature at 80 plus years of age. I do like Sky and I hope they find their way again, but sacking the most experienced broadcaster in this country when he's actually rating really well, it makes me wonder a bit. Okay, well, a bit of news from us now. The Other Side will be sadly leaving the Discernable platform at the end of 2021 and returning in 2022 on our own platforms, as well as with a bit of a big announcement that we can't talk about just yet. So right now, please follow me on Twitter at OtherSideOz. That's at OtherSideOz, AUS, and or on Facebook at facebook.com/TheOtherSideOz, AUS. So The Other Side Oz on Facebook. Now, you can also just search us up on Facebook, but make sure you put in The Other Side and Australia, or The Other Side and Damian Coory. And Coory spelt Coory. Then be sure, once you get there, to click follow on Twitter to follow us, so you make sure that you will see us. And also, when you get to Facebook, make sure that you click the like button to like the page so that you get information. The Facebook page looks like what you're seeing on the screen right now. Now, we do strongly recommend that you continue to follow Discernable, of course, on YouTube and Facebook. But if you're landing on a page that says Discernable and you're looking for The Other Side, it isn't our own separate page. So you have got to find our separate pages to be sure that you stay in contact with us after the end of 2021. Then if you could kindly subscribe to us also on YouTube. Our YouTube page looks like this. And again, you'll need to find our page, not our folder on Discernable's page, and make sure that you subscribe to our page and click the bell so that you get notified when we put up new content. We really look forward to keeping in touch throughout 2022. And don't forget that you can always join our VIP WhatsApp list and have the show link sent to your phone every week. Just drop us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost with a T @gmail.com, and we'll send you the link to opt in on WhatsApp. Right, very important that we stay in touch throughout 2022 because we will be having a big announcement when we return in late January. But we'll be doing shows right through until the end of December, right here on Discernable and the Other Side platforms. 7 years ago, British comedian Rowan Atkinson gave a powerful speech at a political event to fight oppressive new thought and speech control laws that were being brought in the UK. In light of what we're seeing happening in Victoria and the continued push by Labor, the Greens and the left for more restriction on freedom of speech, I thought it might be a good idea to take a listen again to some of Mr. Atkinson's excellent comments.
Parliament's Joint Committee on Human Rights summarised, as you may know, this whole issue very well by saying, while arresting a protester for using threatening or abusive speech may, depending on the circumstances, be a proportionate response, we do not think that language or behaviour that is merely insulting should ever be criminalised in this way. The clear problem with the outlawing of insult is that too many things can be interpreted as such. Criticism is easily construed as insult by certain parties. Ridicule easily construed as insult. Sarcasm, unfavourable comparison, merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. And because so many things can be interpreted as insult, it is hardly surprising that so many things have been, as the examples I talked about earlier show. Although the law under discussion has been on the statute book for over 25 years, it is indicative of a culture that has taken hold of the programs of successive governments, that with the reasonable and well-intentioned ambition to contain obnoxious elements in society, has created a society of an extraordinarily authoritarian and controlling nature. That is what you might call the new intolerance, a new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. I am not intolerant, say many people, say many softly spoken, highly educated, liberal-minded people. I'm only intolerant of intolerance. And people tend to nod sagely and say, oh yes, wise words, wise words. And yet if you think about this supposedly inarguable statement for longer than 5 seconds, you realize that all it is advocating is the replacement of one kind of intolerance with another, which to me doesn't represent any kind of progress at all. Underlying prejudices, injustices, or resentments are not addressed by arresting people. They are addressed by the issues being aired, argued, and dealt with, preferably outside the legal process. For me, the best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it. As with childhood diseases, you can better resist those germs to which you have been exposed. We need to build our immunity to taking offense so that we can deal with the issues that perfectly justified criticism can raise. Our priority should be to deal with the message, not the messenger. As President Obama said in an address to the United Nations only a month or so ago, laudable efforts to restrict speech can become a tool to silence critics or oppress minorities. The strongest weapon against hateful speech is not repression, it is more speech. And that's the essence of my thesis, more speech. If we want a robust society, we need more robust dialogue, and that must include the right to insult or to offend.
Rowan Atkinson with some very wise words there. The minor parties seem divided on whether or not to abolish the states. Clive Palmer's United Australia Party has made it clear that they want the states gone, saying Australia has too many politicians, absolutely, and too many layers of government. Meanwhile, the Lib Dems, the Liberal Democrats, say that while we definitely have way too much government and too many bureaucrats, the answer isn't to abolish the states. In that party's weekly podcast, Liberty Chat, the party's national president, Dr. John Humphreys, explained why a federation of empowered states all competing against each other is actually better and safer for liberty than a centralised government.
Nearly all runaway pseudo-fascist authoritarian governments are associated with the centralisation of power. Nearly all of the worst excesses of government comes from the centralisation of power. And a core ethos of liberal-minded and libertarian-minded people throughout the ages has been the decentralisation of power, the most extreme version being decentralised power to the individual and the family so you can make your own decision. But failing that, decentralising decision-making to your community level or places closer to you.
Yes.
The idea of subsidiarity, where the decisions are made at the closest level as possible to the person in their community. And that's not just some sort of philosophical wankery. There's very good reason for this. The first reason is different communities are different. So the idea of having a centralised rule on all communities presupposes that a bunch of bureaucrats and politicians in Canberra can work out the correct rule for 25 million people across Australia. The truth is, different parts of Australia are different. You know, the best rules for Sydney might not be exactly the same as the best rules for Wagga Wagga or Alice Springs. I mean, different places can be different. So that's one of the benefits of decentralisation. Another one is, and I think this one is the crucial, this is the most important one, and that is that decentralised political power is the laboratory for experiments. If you have centralised power, you can do things one way. And the hope is that we have a bunch of geniuses in Canberra. We just trust our politicians and all the bureaucrats are really smart and they will introduce the one correct way of doing things. And if you believe that, then by all means, believe in centralisation. But if you're skeptical of power, and I got to tell you, I think I'm skeptical of power, and I think, for what it's worth, the defining feature of our party is that we are skeptical of centralized political power. And as you should be more skeptical of politicians and bureaucrats.
Yes.
If you're skeptical of them, then you can't trust that they're always making the right decision. You want there to be experiments. So if you decentralize the states and territories, that's 8 different experiments. Why does that matter? 8 times the chance we could get it right. Also, when you get it wrong, if you get it wrong at the national level, the government always just says, no, we didn't get it wrong. It would have been worse otherwise. They can just say that. We've got nothing to compare it to except for New Zealand. Right? At the state level, if one of the states get it really wrong and the other 7 don't, states and territories, and you can see that failure. You can watch that failure and everyone can point to it and say, well, stop doing that.
That was Dr. John Humphreys, the national president of the Lib Dems, the Liberal Democrats, speaking on Liberty Chat, the podcast of the Liberal Democrats this week. Well, you may or may not have noticed that COP26, the big climate change powwow, happened over the past week, I think, and a bit. If you missed it, don't worry. A lot of people did, including possibly the President of the United States himself, Joe Biden, who may have slept through the whole thing. We're not 100% sure. But here to explain it all to us and make sense of it all is our climate guru, Ben Beattie. Well, not really our climate guru, our energy guru, I should say, shouldn't I, Ben?
They're closely related, but yeah, I'm definitely not a climate scientist, if there is such a thing.
Right. So, yeah, if there is such a thing, I love it. Okay, so what on earth happened? What did we take out of COP26? Did it actually achieve anything? Do we have a new Glasgow Agreement or something like that?
As far as Australia's interests are concerned, I think it was a bit of a non-event. We rejected the call to limit methane emissions, which is good for Australia because we export a lot of methane, natural gas, through our LNG. We're one of the largest exporters in the world. There was a call preceded by the COP26 over the G20 to limit coal consumption and production. Now, Australia is not a big player in terms of global coal production. When you look at the numbers, that's irrefutable, despite what the green lobby and the renewable energy lobby say about Australian coal. So that was watered down significantly. There was some kind of agreement to end deforestation. Whatever that actually means, I'm not sure, but that's pretty much the sum of it. Coal's going to continue, gas will continue, and something about deforestation.
So in a sense, we don't have to cut our coal emissions further. Is that the takeaway as you see it?
Australia only produces 7.9% of the world's coal, and this is from the this is government figures. We are the largest exporter, but in the context of how much we produce, a total of not even 8% is not a big number.
Right. So we don't have to reduce that at all.
Not from anything out of the COP26 for sure.
Okay. So we're still on the Paris Agreement in the sense.
Yeah, the Paris Agreement is where we signed up to, and effectively that hasn't changed. The Paris Agreement was COP21, which fed on from the Kyoto Protocol a few years earlier.
Yep.
And out of those agreements, there's a lot of talk about how we measure things and how we ratchet up their targets. But as far as the targets go, there's nothing binding. We're not penalised by the UN for that.
Now, Joe Biden fell asleep. Reason for this, other than the fact that Joe Biden gets very sleepy?
Yeah, I think Sleepy Joe was what the last president called him. And here's some evidence of that.
You have the chance to make decisions and reach agreements which will affect the lives of generations to come. You are in a position of extraordinary power. You can change forever the trajectory we are on. You can make a world that is once again full of hope, not fear. This is my message from Earth to COP. On behalf of We the 15, I ask you.
Oh boy, when I see stuff like that, I start thinking about the Manchurian candidate, like he's being controlled by someone somewhere and isn't really present as the president of the United States. It's becoming frightfully more and more apparent, isn't it? So, Ben, just tell us quickly, a lot of stuff in the news. Let's just go through some of those news clippings. So firstly, UK energy costs are on the rise. During COP26, we saw evidence of that.
Yeah, that's right. You have new old coal units brought online at quite staggering wholesale prices. And you've got some energy retailers shutting down because they can't afford to buy it, and they're not allowed to sell it at the high cost. So the UK energy system is in a bit of a mess at the moment, which is an interesting juxtaposition against the Glasgow meeting.
So these are old coal-fired power stations that were decommissioned that had to be fired up again because there wasn't enough power.
Yeah, not quite decommissioned. I'd say they're held on standby with their systems ready to go. So yeah, they've been rebooted. Yep, and a whole lot of extra coal production in the UK over this meeting.
Now, the question of the role of gas has been a key issue, and I know that Germany was hesitating signing the pledge to end foreign fossil fuel funding. What's the story there with gas?
Yeah, that's right. So gas is a key issue for the German government. They're trying to turn off nuclear. They're trying to turn off coal, but they're trying to use more gas. Now, this energy crisis in the whole EU is partly because of the high cost of gas at the moment, and the low storage balances as they've been drawing down on their gas storage because it's cost a bit more. Now they're having to draw down on it even more because the wind and solar are not producing as much as they thought they would. And of course, there's a bit of a Barney brewing between Germany and Russia because of this Nord Stream gas pipeline.
Right.
If you're a cartoonist, you'd draw it in the sense that Germany's dependent on a valve that Vladimir Putin has his hand on,
right,
which is geopolitically, that's not a great place to be.
No, it's not. And probably right where Russia would like the EU to be right now. It's a little bit scary, but let's have just to recap for people who've missed your segments in previous shows, perhaps just to explain that when you go to wind and solar, you've got to have some other type of supply, some other type of typically a fossil fuel or nuclear that's going to fill in all the gaps, right? You can't just transition straight to wind and solar. So we're going to have a period of risk here where the EU is going to be, suffering without enough electricity and consistent electricity supply. And that impacts everything because basically electricity is used to run all of our manufacturing and our economies. It's not just electricity to the home as we might think, or not being able to charge your mobile phone. This has massive implications for jobs, for the economy, for the strength of the EU, for security especially. So that is a bit scary. Why are they shutting down nuclear in Germany, Ben? I thought nuclear was, a potential savior in this situation.
Yeah, you'd think so. If the emissions are the biggest problem, then nuclear is certainly should be part of the solution. Those who say that emissions are the greatest problem are often not fans of nuclear energy. They quote Chernobyl and Fukushima. Now, in Germany, as a result of Fukushima, there was a large backlash against nuclear by those with those point of views. And I think Angela Merkel, as the Chancellor, decided to wind them down. But interestingly, as a result, they're sort of increasing their coal consumption as well. There's an article in the Washington Post recently which talks about old churches, hundreds of years old, and the associated villages being bulldozed so they can get at the brown coal underneath.
Yeah, right. So, all these high-flying ideas and this is the problem that we've got in democracies at the moment, I think, is that it's very easy to sell a message that sounds all nice and fluffy because the electorate aren't thinking deeply enough. So you sell these fluffy messages and then you can't deliver on it. Then you wind up sort of winding it. But it doesn't really matter as long as everything looks nice and fluffy on the surface, what's actually going on behind the scenes. And I think it's extremely dangerous. And I think China and Russia know that this is how politics is working in the Western world now. And they're taking advantage of it, no doubt. Of course, China and Russia not present at the G20.
Yeah, interesting that, isn't it? They might have sent some delegates, but I think China are claiming their 2060 net zero position, and everyone sort of seems to accept that. I know that what you mentioned before about the risks to democracy. I mean, our societies, our civil societies, and our political systems have evolved alongside the growth of reliable electricity. Since the 19th century, we've been on this growth increase, and it's underpinned by our dependence on electricity. I think a lot of people take it for granted that
completely
that electricity would be there, but you just think about the disruption in your life when there's a blackout for half an hour.
Yeah, well, especially our young people who don't experience blackouts or brownouts because we've had consistent electricity supply. But those of us who are a bit older will remember the days when we had blackouts, you had to get the candles out. And that was before we had all this technology and internet and computers, and you could actually do your work without electricity. Now you can't.
Yeah, it's impossible in this day and age. And when you think about it, even down to a fundamental level of the water that we use. So you'd argue that our quality of life stems from the fact that we don't have open sewers anywhere. Well, that's a big part of it anyway. So, and you certainly can't have those pumps and those systems running without reliable electricity.
Now, you've quoted here Greenpeace in The Guardian. What did they say, Ben?
Greenpeace are always reliable for a laugh. They are
sad, really, because they used to be quite good in the day, but yeah, they've gone completely nuts and woke.
Yeah, that's right. So the $100 billion a year is $100 billion US, which is a famous figure that stemmed from the Kyoto and Paris, etc. Those meetings. So it's $100 billion a year. That's the floor, not the ceiling. The floor that the Western advanced economies are meant to hand over to developing economies. And I presume that's through organizations like the UN and the World Economic Forum, World Banks and Green Banks and those kind of organizations. So they get their cut.
Yeah. When you say hand over to developing countries, what do you mean by that?
It's a fund. It's a green fund, which is meant to help developing economies develop without creating greenhouse gas emissions that supposedly the Western economies have put into the atmosphere.
Right. So the Western economies, it's like paying reparations for the fact that we've been several decades ahead through no fault of our own, not descending into the hell of communism. I think we managed to keep things progressing along. $100 billion a year is what we're supposed to pour into this fund to support developing economies. I guess there's nothing wrong with supporting developing economies if you can afford to do it. And if those developing economies are actually developing in an open, liberal and democratic fashion, then I'd be all for it. But it's a bit concerning when we see bucket loads of money going in a direction that perhaps is going to come back and bite us. And we have China, with its tanks and its guns and its increasing military. Why on earth would we want to be funding that and funding them for anything? It's beyond me.
It's a bit like you see those the movies like in Da Vinci Code where the villain is flaying himself for atonement. And that's kind of what the UN expects the West to do.
Tell us why you don't buy, in simple terms, why you don't buy the carbon argument that, we are seeing an increase in carbon. We don't deny that. But why does this carbon not translate into necessarily a climate crisis?
There's a couple of reasons for that. That's a good question. That's one of the questions I often ask people. What made you either believe it or become skeptical of it? So I'm kind of in the, if you put it on a scale of 1 to 10 and 10 being we've got to decarbonize yesterday and 1 being don't care at all, I'm more like a 3. I think I'm interested in pollution and the environment, true pollution, and true pollution is not carbon dioxide, in my opinion. So one of the reasons I say that is we've had these global lockdowns across 2020 and in places like Melbourne 2021. But I think there was some figures put out by reputable organizations that say global emissions fell by somewhere between 5 and 8% across that period. If you then look at the daily turned into monthly average CO2 concentration in ppms in the atmosphere,
Parts per million. Yep.
Yeah, this is the 400, the 410, the 420, the 430. If, as a side note, if you go to social media, you'll see people have describe themselves, their birth date as the CO2.
That's the ppm number.
Yep.
Oh my God, could it get any more cult-like and idiotic?
That's a sure sign that you're not going to get much sense out of them.
These are the people who'd have pronouns of bizarre origin, I'm sure.
That's an entirely different topic, but interestingly enough, those people seem to travel in the same circles, right?
Oh, funny. It's funny, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep. They're very they like the cult stuff. So back onto the emissions. So global emissions fell by somewhere between 5 and 8% as lockdowns hit and plane travel and all sorts of travel stopped and a lot of industry slowed down. And you can see that also in electricity consumption. There was a big dip across the world, and coal prices and all that kind of thing, and oil prices. So as that demand dried up, those emissions did not go into the atmosphere. You would expect that an experiment of that magnitude, which is pretty difficult to conceive 2 years ago that it would actually happen, you'd expect that to show up in the atmospheric ppms as they're measured
so the
daily,
parts per
monthly.
million of carbon in the atmosphere should go down by a corresponding 5 or 8%, right?
Well,
or
at least at least something, right?
Yeah, right.
But when you go and look at that, and that information's published by several organizations from America, and NASA gets involved, and all these good organizations, there's no change in the ppms. It still continued to rise at exactly the same rate. When you go and find this I think it's a North American Ocean Administration, NOAA.
Yep.
They have a piece on why you can't see it in the ppms on their website.
I thought they might. What does that say?
It says almost verbatim that natural emissions vary to the far more than human emissions. So so they're admitting that the argument that the anti-climate change group have been saying for ages that it's actually probably more the effect of natural occurrence, the carbon increase. Well, they say that the variation because of the COVID-19 lockdowns is lost in the noise of the natural variation of emissions from the planet normally from its normal carbon cycle.
Right. So they're admitting that those natural variations outweigh the man-made ones. So that's a
better way of saying it. Yep. So they're saying that natural variations are much larger than the human variations. And you're thinking, well, in that case, why all the fuss?
So,
but if you want to see a balanced opinion on it, we should ask Julia Zemiro, well-known climate scientist.
Yes, well-known climate scientist. Tell us about this clip.
Well, Julia, she was a guest presenter. She did from her home through the internet. She did a presentation on a podcast as part of I think it was a climate council or one of those lobbies. And she had a bit to say about the state of the world if we don't cut emissions, and she had a bit to say about what she'd say to Scott Morrison if he came knocking looking for help.
And yes, I'm Julia Zemiro. Thank you. And you might be thinking, you're not a scientist or an economist, and that is correct. I'm an artist, and I'm a good communicator of ideas. I know how to listen, and I play well with others. If you see me on the street, please come up to me and let's chat. I always think of Greta Thunberg's line, the magnificent Greta, when she was still a child, saying, I don't want your hope, I want your panic. You have my panic and I'm listening, because if we don't listen, come Armageddon, when the earth is scorched, the climate wars have begun, and it's not a film or a Netflix TV series, it's real, and we've got no electricity or internet, and we can only come out in the relative cool of the night, bleary-eyed, sitting in a circle. Who will keep us entertained? Who will we look to? Or rather, who will we look to make us feel and dance and laugh and sing and remember? It will be the artists. And if it happens tomorrow and say Scott Morrison or Barnaby Joyce come to watch my apocalyptic show, we'll be full. They'll be turned away because they could have done so much with the position they have, and they have done so little.
So Julia is a great presenter on Rockwiz. It's a show I've watched quite a lot, and but I'm a bit worried about her wish to exclude people from the campfire, so to speak.
Yeah,
if they don't agree with her.
Well, it's the totalitarian,
craziness.
authoritarian tendencies of the left, my friend. They come out. They
do, and it doesn't take much to get it out, does it?
Oh no, it doesn't. Just scratch beneath. Just disagree. That's what you got to do. Just disagree for 5 seconds, and how dare you? How dare you? That's why I left the left.
In a similar vein, you can see where this thought process ends up at the top of very important organisations like the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So they drive the IPCC and all these UN degrowth strategies, which are meant to help the world. When you look at Christiana Figueres, she's obviously she talks very well and she's very convincing.
She's the head of this UNFCCC thing.
That's right. Well, she was until recently.
Right. We could do a little degrowth of the UN, I think.
Could use it, couldn't it? So I've got a couple of clips here. Christiana, she talks about the money. I think in this one, actually, she's talking about it's not billions, it's trillions.
Let's have a listen.
The 100 billion, let's remember, is a political promise. It is not the cost of the transition. The cost of the transition is actually in the trillions. Sure. So the NDCs actually need to be supported by much, much higher volumes of finance than just the 100 billion. Even the 100 billion is not going to be delivered by 2021, and it was supposed to be delivered on a yearly basis starting in 2020. So that is already a breach of trust that is going to be very difficult here to deal with. What we do know from the report that has been filed is that there has been a progress toward the 100 billion, and that apparently the 100 billion will then finally come forward in 2023 and then actually take a huge leap forward to 500 billion the year after.
Southern hemisphere nation. Why should I trust the developed world, though, when it's 25% below those targets that you agreed?
No, I totally agree. It's very, very difficult. And honestly, trust is a very fragile element of these negotiations. And many promises have been met and many of them have not been kept. And so I think the major challenge here is to rebuild that trust between North and South, between the haves and the have-nots, between the vulnerable populations in every country and those that are directing those countries. There is actually a widening gap here of trust that really needs to be addressed.
Okay, so that's Christiana Figueres from the United Nations FCCC or something like that, one of the climate bodies that looks after the IPCC that does all the climate justification. And she's talking billions, no more billions, we want trillions, or it's going to be a trillion. As if the developed world can just afford a trillion at the moment, to just hand over a trillion to what may or may not end up actually helping poor people at the end of the day, right, Ben? We don't know.
Well, if I was living in a hut in the middle of Africa with dirt floors, and I had no light and no power, and if I wanted to cook something, I had to burn dung or cut down the nearest tree, I think I'd be looking for more than solar panels on the roof. I think the first thing you could do would be like India's doing, is building some big baseload power stations and hooking up these communities to electricity. Once they're there, then they have access to products that work, right? And they can improve their quality of life, which means they live longer, which means their kids go to school.
I'll stop it with all the common sense. This is the left we're talking about. The whole idea is that you just get bleeding heart. Oh, the poor people, and here are all the rich people with all the, and it sounds lovely and everybody votes for you. It's as simple as that. You don't need to get into actually having a brain, using your brain. How does technology actually work? How are we going to organize all of this? What would be the best structure for it? What freedoms do we need to ensure that innovation develops? What competition, what support for business, what support for enterprise do we need to engage in to ensure that we lift people out of poverty the right way? No. We'll just hand over $1 trillion to despotic countries that have failed to organize themselves appropriately. probably through no fault of the people, I might add, but have been taken advantage of by horrible people and horrible governments. Usually those people who hold views of the left, I might point out, but we don't want to get too political, although we are a bit political on the show, I must say. All right, I'm rabbiting on, but Ben, it does come back to this, and she does speak the language of the left. And that's what I find so disturbing about all of this climate change stuff, is that it's just all about redistribution of wealth. Just take chunks of money from the rich people and give it to the poor people. It's that Robin Hood bird brain mentality that you can just transfer our tokens of wealth, the currency or the dollars that we produce, and give them to a bunch of other people, and they're going to know what to do with it, without transferring innovation, knowledge, expertise, or morphing societies out of the dark ages and out of communism into, looking at why the West was won, so to speak, or why the West developed, why it became wealthy. Perhaps you want to emulate that rather than emulating what causes poverty, which is the handing over of wealth when there's no value provided in return. Correct?
Well, look at what's the West is now trying to self-destruct through some of these policies, some kind of atonement. The ideology is strong in the left. If I was going to go and be a complete heretic and take on a sacred cow, I would argue that if you looked objectively at someone like Mother Teresa, here's one for you, Damon. This will get me some haters.
You go. You're going to take down Mother Teresa on the other side now. That is the other side. I'm telling you, that's what this show's about.
Yeah. So iconoclast supremo here. I would argue that if in a modern context, Mother Teresa did a lot of good things, but one thing she did out of ideology was prevent any form of contraception to the people that she was trying to help. Now, as a result, what have we seen in the West? One of the greatest innovations, if you listen to Jordan Peterson, was the pill, which enabled women to escape the trap of pregnancy and that whole life. So as you want to improve your society, you need to give everyone equal opportunity. Now, if you're pregnant at 14 in a third world country, you don't have much opportunity.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, look, I mean, I saw now I'm trying to remember who it was, did a fantastic documentary about Mother Teresa and how you can look at the whole thing from a different perspective, that she was kind of the PR story that the Vatican needed at a particular point in time. But
and I'm not saying that she's a bad person. Or
no,
bad
God,
things,
of course not.
But so I have to say that now. But from the point of view of if you looked at it holistically, you could certainly criticize that perspective from which is based on ideology, not on science. And I think when you look at the parallels between that and the green movement, you can certainly draw those parallels with some accuracy.
Yeah, actually, it was Hitchens. It was Hitchens who did the documentary. It's worth having a look at, but certainly challenging.
Christopher Hitchens, yeah, he was sensational.
Certainly challenging to our perceptions of Mother Teresa as a bit of a saint-like figure, but very interesting to listen to and to watch for a bit of a thought exercise. Yeah, look, I mean, we've got to start thinking better. We can't just be thinking with our gut instinct and our all the time. You've got to balance it out. You've got to have your gut instinct. You've got to have your feeling, your sensitivity and your compassion, but you've got to balance that out with some rational brain as well and think about how can we deliver the maximum value to people to get them out of poverty. And the way to do that is, competitive free markets are going to do that, and innovation and technology and all of the things that have made the West great. You don't just toss that out the window and say, okay, well, we've got a problem now, so we'll just transfer $1 trillion from the Northern Hemisphere to the Southern Hemisphere. What a load of rubbish.
Yeah, that's right. Because what you mentioned before is right. If $1 trillion goes into developing economies, even under stewardship of the, holier than thou, whiter than white UN, then where are the most despotic and corrupt leaders found? In those countries. So I can't see it working. All I can see is a wealth transfer.
Yeah, they just prop up the poverty. That's what happens, unfortunately. It's a sad reality, but it's something that we just need different approaches to handing over cash to despotic governments and allowing them to continue to prosper and survive when they really should collapse under the weight of the people's outrage. Now, I want to talk a little bit before we get to Australia. I want to talk a little bit about these private jets they were all flying around in. Not to mention Joe Biden's entourage of 85 vehicles, including his own mega truck, which, I mean, why couldn't they have done the whole damn call on Zoom?
Yeah, it's pretty commonly raised as a criticism of the whole
the hypocrisy writ large of this elite class that flap around the world and think they know how to rule the rest of us like emperors. I mean, it's like an emperor class. It's pathetic.
It is, and they've got their sycophants and their court jesters. So I put a lot of the media in that bucket. Unfortunately,
absolutely,
they're not going to care too much for it or care who I am and what I'm saying. But I think a lot of people agree with me.
No, a lot of people agree. Absolutely, a lot of people agree with us more and more and more every day, mate.
There's a good podcast at the Guardian Australia, which is run by Catherine Murphy, and it's good in the sense that sorry for the plug.
Yeah, no, hey, look, it's always good to know what the left are up to, and
you need
how
to
polluted and fuzzy their thinking is. So it's good to dive into this stuff.
This is that's an excellent point. So I make an effort to listen and read where these people are coming from, because if you try and dismiss their arguments out of hand, you sort of get lost in the whole mess. What you need.
The tragedy is they think they're the intellectual elite, and they're not. They think they're the smart ones, and they're the laziest thinkers of all.
If you listen to, there's 2 podcasts of hers. She's had Matt Canavan on and Keith Pitt, and I'll describe that as she's venturing into the lion's den then, because Matt Canavan, to be honest, he just ate her alive. I felt a bit bad for her because she did have to just dismiss Matt's factual, objective arguments with just laughing at him and changing the subject.
But that's the left's tactic, right? As soon as they don't have an argument, they go to ridicule, they go to personality, they go to reputation, and they just pull you down and say, "Oh, you know, I get it all the time from my old lefty journo mates." All right, mate. That's very ideological this week. I'm sorry I went on a few rants there, but I rarely get the chance to do that on this show.
I'm open to it, mate. I don't mind a rant of my own.
All right. Thanks, Ben. We'll see you. I want to have you back next week because I want to talk about hydrogen, or at least within the next 2 weeks. I want to talk about hydrogen. You wrote a fantastic article for The Spectator. This is the alternative fuel that's going to save us all. So we'll have a chat about that soon.
Great. Thanks, Damian.
Okay, well, a bit of news from us now. The Other Side will be sadly leaving the Discernable platform at the end of 2021 and returning in 2022 on our own platforms, as well as with a bit of a big announcement that we can't talk about just yet. So right now, please follow me on Twitter at OtherSideOz. That's at OtherSideOz, AUS, and or on Facebook at facebook.com/The Other Side Oz, AUS. So The Other Side Oz on Facebook. Now, you can also just search us up on Facebook, but make sure you put in The Other Side and Australia, or The Other Side and Damian Coory. And Coory spelt Coory. Then be sure, once you get there, to click follow on Twitter to follow us. So you make sure that you will see us. And also when you get to Facebook, make sure that you click the like button to like the page so that you get information. The Facebook page looks like what you're seeing on the screen right now. Now, we do strongly recommend that you continue to follow Discernable, of course, on YouTube and Facebook. But if you're landing on a page that says Discernable and you're looking for The Other Side, it isn't our own separate page. So you have got to find our separate pages to be sure that you stay in contact with us after the end of 2021. Then if you could kindly subscribe to us also on YouTube. Our YouTube page looks like this. And again, you'll need to find our page, not our folder on Discernable's page, and make sure that you subscribe to our page and click the bell so that you get notified when we put up new content. We really look forward to keeping in touch throughout 2022. And don't forget that you can always join our VIP WhatsApp list and have the show link sent to your phone every week. Just drop us an email at theothersideost@gmail.com, theothersideost with a T @gmail.com, and we'll send you the link to opt in on WhatsApp. Right, very important that we stay in touch throughout 2022 because we will be having a big announcement when we return in late January. But we'll be doing shows right through until the end of December, right here on Discernable and the Other Side platforms. Hi, this is Damian Coory. If you enjoyed this episode of The Other Side, please like, subscribe, click every button and bell you possibly can on whatever platform you're on, and please tell your friends. That's the #1 way you can help us grow. If you'd like to join our VIP WhatsApp group and never miss an episode, because we'll send you a link as soon as they come out, just send us an email first on theothersideost@gmail.com. asking to opt in, and we'll add you to our VIP group. We'll send you a link so you can add yourself. It's a one-way group, not a chat group, so you won't be bombarded with messages or anything like that. And if you'd like to join the Discernible crew and get all the content from our platform, you can do that at discernable.io. discernable.io.